A dark promise, carried from one generation to another. Our beloved home, threatened by war, famine, and plague. All the while, our enemies grow ever stronger, ever bolder. Now we fight to save what we love, or risk losing it all. The Great Culling has begun. Moonbriar, a narrative adventure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of IndieX 2023. And if you watched my previous sessions yesterday, one could tell that somehow the amazing anthropomorphic character game base this year will end up being streamed by me. But actually, it's not the case. But this hour, it's actually one of those cases because we're going to play a really original game, a really amazing looking game called Moonbriar, which is developed by the studio Oldblood. And it's a pleasure having with me Jon Oldblood. At least that's how your name was.
You got it.
Yeah, Jon Oldblood. Is that your actual surname?
No, it is the
Because
pen
that
name,
would
but
be really badass, like
I get that a lot. But yeah, no, it goes with the studio name. But yeah,
yeah. Just imagine you actually were called old blood. It's yeah, it's something else. How are you, John? Are
I
you excited for being here, having this conversation?
I I am. I'm absolutely excited. I appreciate you guys hosting this awesome event. I've been watching the stream. There's some really amazing games on, and yeah, I'm really excited to get a chance to talk a little bit with you and talk a little bit about Moonbriar. And yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, and on the organization side, I would like to thank you and the team for submitting Moonbriar. We loved it almost instantly. We were really amazed by not only the art direction, which is stunning, as everyone will see in the next few minutes, but also the quality of the voice acting. We now know that the indie scene is more and more surprising us with the standard, with the quality standard that we have. But this quality of voice acting, I think 10 years ago you would expect this on a AAA, and now you can see an amazing project like Moonbriar already showcasing this. Was this like a huge, not only a huge investment on your side, because obviously to have this kind of quality, some investment is has to take place, but also what you envision, like the quality standard you created for Moonbriar. You said this will only make sense if we have this level of quality in terms of voice acting.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. When you're working on a game like this, the narrative games are, I think, pretty niche. They're not going to have as huge of an audience, and this is kind of a game that does blend a lot of genres. It does have a lot of the visual novel elements. I would closely associate it with games that have come out recently. Like I think if people have played Pentiment or maybe The Life and Suffering of Cervantes, kind of games where they really are blending, hints of RPG type elements, and they're mostly reliant on lots of narrative and kind of making these decisions that are shaping the world around them. Um, Coming into it, I wanted to make a game that was going to be kind of tying in a lot of those similar themes, but the decision on the voice acting was a complicated one because I knew it was going to dramatically increase the scope and the budget for the project. But my hope was that if we could bring in a really strong cast for the game, that it might help expand the market a little bit. People that maybe aren't as keen on wanting to read large amounts of text might be more drawn into some of the more narrative based games if they were kind of getting to experience like this acting that was happening along with it. So that's kind of what drove the decision. It was a huge effort, even just getting like a demo like this voice when you have about 20 different actors involved. Definitely would not have been possible 10 years ago. The budget would have been much higher because it would have involved probably trying to fly a bunch of people out to studios and things like that. And now the ability to record and do professional voice recording sessions with someone in London and someone else in the United States and someone in Canada, um, it's a lot more possible now than it would have been, 10 or 15 years ago. So it's definitely something that it was a lot of work just even on the demo, but I really did think it helped improve the quality of the whole project quite a bit.
So I'd suggest we dive into Moonbriar, the demo we
Sure.
have, and I will overwrite my previous save, and we will start over. You mentioned how, in a way, this narrative game, although your genre approach was close to visual novel, isn't it amazing that a genre that we can more or less pinpoint starting in Japan and being really big in Japan in the last 15 years, having this kind of Western approach or Western interpretations, like a new way of creating video games, and now opening new markets for the Western players?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see how much it's evolved in the last few years, especially. It was a game that I think, honestly, if you were trying to make a game like this a couple of years ago, it would have been a lot harder. Really, visual novels were very dating sim focused, and it really has only been the last several years that we've seen projects start to come out that are not really just a dating sim and just kind of exploring more complex stories and themes. Stuff like, honestly, like Pentiment I was so happy to see a project like that getting funded by a large studio. That's a very risky type project for them to be working on and putting out something that was very different. But I'm so glad they did.
So in my case, I don't know what happened with you, but my first contact with the genre was actually with the Ace Attorney series, which is one of my favorite series of all time. I completely adore it. And the contact with that series opened up my will or created an openness to start playing visual novels. And then suddenly you have indie developers in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, and also in South America, creating this or reinterpreting this genre and using it as a narrative tool. And I think it's amazing, the kind of games that we've been receiving. And Moonbriar is obviously one of those examples.
No, thank you. No, I mean, I also, that was my introduction to the genre as well. I think it's the introduction probably for a lot of people. Yeah, and I've really enjoyed getting to explore this. And Ralph Ineson is the narrator who does the intro scene that you were just going through there. And I was really, really excited to have him involved in the project. I love a lot of the films that he's done. And it was definitely kind of a surreal bucket list moment to have a recording session.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Was it, did you fly to meet him, or?
No, we did a full remote. This is definitely a small indie project that's self-funded. We're not working with any publishers or anything, right now. So we try to save money where we can. So we did a live session just on Zoom, and he was recording on his end, and we were kind of just working through all the lines. But very surreal. But it was great. He's a real professional, so it was awesome getting to finally work with him.
In a way, let me just also tell our audience, obviously a game like this, and I think you can notice from the streaming session, not only the soundtrack is amazing and really fantastically composed, also all the sound effects, all the ambience, I'm feeling this on my headset, it really exponentiates all the quality of the voice acting. So I know this might sound strange because this is a streaming session, and obviously I also have a huge amount of pleasure to talk with Jon. So I hope this doesn't in a way ruin the experience. So my suggestion is, because Sir Becca's already is doing this on the chat, go to Moonbriar's Steam store page, wishlist it, and as soon as the demo, there's the demo available, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. There's a demo on Steam.
So let's use this session not only to, like, an appetizer for you to see how beautiful this game looks and how good the narrative is written, but I also suggest you all to play it for yourselves, immerse yourselves without anyone talking on top of it, go play the demo, wishlist the game, because I think it's the best way to drink all the small details that this game has. So, taking this in consideration, how many people are developing Moonbriar now, John?
So I'm the sole developer on the game, but I do work with a couple different people that help out as contractors for a lot of the art and the animation. I do little bits of everything, but then I have a small team. I think in total there's about 4 or 5 of us that are involved in various parts of it. If you don't include the voice actors, then it's huge. But just the people that are working on the project itself, yeah, there's only about 4 or 5 of us. So,
technically speaking, yesterday we had a game with a similar approach. I think you also know that game, Chicken Police, which has also this dynamic, like visual novel approach in terms of dialogue, and they rigged the animation for the characters. That's how. And sorry to pry behind the curtain, but do you started working with illustrations from your concept artist and also from your main artist, and then you rigged everything, or do you have several stances of these characters?
no, it's a really great question. So these are all essentially just single images of a character, and we used Spine is an animation software system that we used to handle the animations of it. So it's a blend of skeletal animations, but also what they call mesh deprivation, which is kind of where sometimes you'll notice the characters, their heads are kind of moving in ways that almost feels a little bit 3D. And it's really just kind of taking that, you sort of build a mesh on top of the art and just manipulate that in a way. And it limits, you can't make something full 3D, but you can really fake a bit of that like 3D impression. Animations is one area where I think if eventually I'm able to get more funding for the project, I'd like to come back and do a lot more animations. Right now, we kind of just in the demo have put in, really, it's pretty much just singular animations for a lot of the characters. There's some special ones that we've done, but for the most part, it's really just, a single animation per character. But at some point, that's one area where I'd love to come back and really flesh out the game more. My wish list for the things I would like to do to really elevate the project are very high, but sometimes you've got to make concessions. So
I'm just lowering just a bit. I don't know how in the streaming session this is taking, but I was having some difficulty hearing you. So sorry for pausing the game just a bit. So yeah, but we can notice that I think it's really well solved, the meshing of the animation, because it looks 3D, because I think you work well with the maximum possible angle of distortion for example for the heads. Yeah.
Yeah, we did the same thing with the backgrounds. Are also using the same software as well to do that. So it allowed us to be able to do like I feel like really good kind of the worlds feel alive, both the environments and the characters, but they're really just essentially single sprites.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
both cases. So we didn't have to build out a ton of different sprite sheets and different things for each of them. Allowed us to move faster and cheaper than you would think.
But that's a really, if you think about it, I think there's always the solutions, especially that indie studios get to achieve what they envision for their games. It's always so. I that's why I love so much having these kinds of conversation, because yes, there are budget constraints, there are time constraints, there are scope constraints, and how you achieve this kind of animation to make everything more organic, more dynamic. It's something that it's really interesting to see, because if you had a game like this with a bigger budget, possibly if you have had a big publisher or you belong to a AAA studio, possibly you would have all of this single animated and modeled and everything. But a game like this looking this good, and the solutions you have, I think it's always like how creative and how in a way the way that indie creators can surpass the obstacles of the side of the team, and the project. So yeah, that's taking this into account. How many people are doing the art for the game, even counting with
So
contractors?
yeah, so we've got a character artist and an environment artist, and that's it. And then there's an animator on the other side. So it's really just one that's focusing on the backgrounds and trying to mesh them together with characters, and then the character artist. Um, yeah, no, it's a pretty contained team. We're really lucky though. Everyone with that it has gotten involved in the project is just super talented. Um, and that is the area. There's so many elements that I would love to be able to do quite a bit more, but just because of the nature of the budget, we're trying to just where we can make it as strong as possible, but also knowing that it's probably not going to be as nice or as fleshed out in some of these areas as we would like. But the core thing is just trying to get the project itself fully together.
What we just noticed was, aside from the conversation, we had a pop-up stating that we had +1 to diplomacy, because like you said, this is not only a narrative game with a visual novel approach, but also we have RPG elements behind it, especially statistics. How much will this affect our playthrough?
It definitely will have a big effect. Early in the demo, what we're kind of playing through right now is really what I would call more of the prologue. It's kind of really just setting up some of the background context of the world. You're kind of learning about some of the core characters and their past. And then once you get through the prologue is really when you can actually start kind of moving around through the world and interacting with all the various characters. And towards the end of the demo takes anywhere between like 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how much you play with it. But really, it's up to you about how you interact with every character and whether or not you interact with certain characters, and the relationships you're building with them will further build the skills that you're developing in the game. So things like your diplomacy, your strategy, your willpower, things like that. Those things all start to factor in. You're able to periodically do skill checks, which kind of opens up special paths for you, where it will essentially be testing, and then depending on how good you are at certain skills, you'll be able to kind of open up whole new paths. And it does long term. You probably won't notice it too much in the demo, but long term it starts having some pretty big impacts on the overall game. Really, by the end of the game, there's currently 6 endings that we're working on right now tied to the game. But the impact to all of the characters and kind of who lives and who dies over the course of the game is definitely strongly impacted by both your decisions and kind of your ability to sort of develop those skills over the course of the game.
We have sessions in our chat saying, "Damn, that's a big demo," and I have to agree. Like, if you have a 45 minutes to 1 hour and a half demo available, which is longer than some games, how long are you envisioning Moonbriar to be? Just a single playthrough, of course. Or even
a single. It's not going to be honestly terribly huge. We're sort of estimating right now. It'll really depend on how much you're trying to explore all of the paths, of course, because obviously you don't necessarily have to talk to every single character. You don't have to go down every sort of B story path that's there. But we're kind of anticipating it'll be probably in the 5 to 6 hour range. So not huge per se, but decently long. That's kind of our goal, but really along the way, the hope is that if players have played through and they've kind of gone through the story, that they'll be inclined to go back and try to go down different paths, try to explore different things. And we're going to try to set up the save system in a way to kind of allow you to sort of restart a core. It is a relatively long demo, but I wanted to kind of give people a good taste of what the game is. I would rather that people not be surprised. I don't want people to think that, oh, this is like an RPG, and then they're playing and then like, oh, this isn't an RPG, this is more of a narrative game. So I want to kind of give people a full taste of it, so they sort of know what they're getting into. And my hope is that if they play the demo and the way the demo ends, you're kind of ending on a really kind of key, important first, really big dramatic moment in the game. Where you're starting to make some huge decisions that start sort of shifting the rest of the game. I kind of wanted to end it on a high note, and so that was kind of the idea of let's just make it a big demo. Let's end it on a really strong note. So that's kind of why it ended up being a bit of a longer demo. But hopefully people will enjoy that. Hopefully they'll get kind of more sucked into the story a little bit. And I'm hoping that they'll like it.
Since this is a visual novel game, and at least now you're developing it for PC, are you thinking of bringing it for Switch, for example, or mainly or possibly to iPad and iOS? Because it looks like a perfect game to just play on your screen, you know, sitting or in bed or...
Yeah. What I'm doing right now, so one of the things that I've recently been adding in, it's not in the demo that's on there right now, but I've been getting it all set up and working on the Steam Deck, and it plays really, really well on like a handheld device.
Okay.
So the first thing that I'm doing is getting it operating on the Steam Deck because it makes good sense. I would love to be able to explore getting it onto some consoles. It's not something that I'm actively planning on doing just yet. I kind of am going to at some point have to make kind of a business decision around, is it better to explore things like localization and trying to get more languages out there, or to explore things like, trying to maybe get it on another console or not. So it kind of ties into what we were talking about before of like, there's a lot of things I would like to do with it, but just based on the nature of the project and budget constraints, at some point I'll probably have to limit a little bit some of the things that I do. So we'll see, I guess is the answer. I would hope to, though.
Actually, while you were answering this, at the same time, we had that question about Steam Deck on the chat. So yeah, it's likely it's already answered.
Yeah. I definitely want it to be Steam Deck verified when it comes.
Yeah. Do you think it's technically? Do you feel it's difficult? Or...
What specifically?
To have the game verified, or do you feel even now it's a smooth compatibility?
It's going pretty well right now. I have kind of realized as I was implementing all the controller support, sometimes you can, if you're not building with the thought of having a controller in mind from the start, which unfortunately I wasn't really thinking about the Steam Deck when I first started kind of pulling the game together. I definitely, there was a lot of bugs to work through, but it's in a pretty good place now. It's not fully set up. I'd say it's about 90% fully working with the controller right now. There's still a few little places that I got to work out how the controller will interact with various things. But I'm thinking it should be relatively smooth sailing to get a Steam Deck verified when it's all said and done. It's really trying to just make sure we can avoid needing to have to like click or touch anything on the screen. But yeah, so we're making good progress on that. And it does, I will say it actually, in some ways, it feels a little bit better to play it on a Steam Deck in kind of a more relaxed setting than playing it on the computer. It was built to play on the computer, but it plays great on the Steam Deck.
I was actually going to ask you something. When we had that initial introduction with that entity, that three-headed leopard, was it 3D? Or it was also illustration and animated?
That was just an illustration too. Yeah, there's
really?
no 3D anything in the game. It's all
because it's the third or fourth time I opened the game, and every single time I just think I got in the back of my mind, I need to ask them why the first character is 3D and all the other ones are illustration, but it's all illustration and mesh animation.
It's all 2D with mesh deformation. Yes.
Yeah, congratulations, because I really thought it was 3D.
Thank you.
Another thing, this is land of Iberis.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of our own peninsula. Was it your at least grammatical inspiration to call this universe like this? Because it's one word away from...
now that you're mentioning it, like we were talking before the session started, that I have been to Portugal before, and I love the country. I love Lisbon. Maybe at some level, deep-seated, that may have been where it was coming from. I don't think I actively made that decision, but it may have been, somewhere deep in the back of my head for sure. Those subconscious decisions.
Yeah, because now I already played this prologue. And at the time, I think it was in July when you submitted the game, I had like, if this ends up being a finalist, if the game ends up being a finalist, I need to ask if it was inspired by Iberia. Yeah. Another question: why did you decide, or what was the thought process behind having the Leporidae, the rabbits, being the at least the main characters, the protagonists of the story? Because we have other species in this world.
Yeah, no, it was really kind of tied into the core idea of the larger themes in the game are around this race that essentially has been kind of like cursed, and rabbits felt like a really good fit for that, with just they're kind of famous in the real world for their ability to like rapidly produce, for their speed, their kind of their cunning, and I thought it tied in well with kind of the lore and mythology of what we were trying to craft, of essentially a world where this race is having to deal with this culling that's just periodically happening over and over again. And if ever there was kind of like a race of animals that would be capable of dealing with that, it felt like rabbits would be like an interesting fit for that. It was also partially inspired by one of my favorite stories, which is Watership Down, which is kind of was my first kind of experience with like anthropomorphic animals that were sort of these living, breathing characters. Just so happens they were rabbits. So I think at some level too, I kind of wanted to pay a little bit of homage to one of my favorite stories that I always had growing up, which was Watership Down. So I think I've just always wanted to explore that with rabbits a little bit.
So even in the beginning of the project, like your first ideas, you already had in mind that this will be a rabbit based game.
I did. It's one of those things that it was kind of an important decision. I don't know if it was fully the correct decision to go down like the anthropomorphic path, but I thought it would be different. I thought it would make the game stand out a little bit, as just trying to explore something a little bit different and unique with the setting. So that's kind of where I ended up pretty quickly into it, having that realization of like I knew what I wanted to do with this story, and now it just kind of the rabbits made a lot of sense for the story that we were trying to do.
Is the entire script already finished?
It is, but we're actually doing quite a bit of rewriting. That's been one of the slower parts of it. You kind of, for anyone out there that's interested in getting into the developing the visual novel space, it's easy to forget sometimes that you have to write a novel to go with the video game, and it's more complex than you would expect to, because the number of potential paths that you can go down and reputations. You'll probably notice even as you're playing the demo here that characters' reputations of you will go up and down. And to make the game realistic, we also have to sometimes take that into account, where the character, we have to think about, do they like you more or less than they did before, and should that alter how they respond to you? So you end up with these incredibly elaborate and over the top conversation paths that can branch in many, many ways. And if you're playing the demo, you may only, see one path, but in the reality could have been, there may have been 10 different paths that you may have missed. And some of it could just be related to that character, maybe more positively reacting to you, more negatively reacting to you. So the writing is a very slow process. There are, as you can see, other characters in the game that are not rabbits. Eventually, there will be several others. You'll have the ability to kind of potentially ally with and bring in other characters. For example, there's a badger that's a mercenary that's kind of traveling around that you'll be able to like potentially, if you're lucky and depending on your skills, you can try to bring in as someone that essentially is aiding you on the journey. So there are some other animals that you'll see that aren't rabbit based, but yeah, the vast majority of the characters are all rabbits.
And, well, someone that dives into Moonbriar, can they expect a more grounded historical and fictional world, or eventually we'll dive into a more fantasy approach?
I would say that it's probably more of the low fantasy side. It's definitely a little bit more grounded. We don't get too much into any kind of like, there's no magical powers that you can develop. We don't really see any kind of like, magical or divine elements that are really happening in the story. a lot of the sort of larger narrative elements are really kind of tied into inspirations of real world historical events,
Yeah, yeah.
or in some cases, even kind of some of the ongoing various conflicts that we see
Hmm.
throughout the world right now. The kind of experiencing a lot of things from the last few years shaped the story. We have, COVID and this like essentially this huge plague that was sweeping through the world, which kind of inspired part of the story here of like these people that are dealing with these like plagues and terrible things that are happening, and kind of endless wars, endless conflict. So I would say it's more exploring real world things. I've kind of pitched this to people that have asked about the game. It's essentially a blend of something like Redwall, but with a little bit of Game of Thrones. There's a lot of politics
Yeah.
involved. And it's really about you building relationships. If your Nightshade is kind of this core villain that you're trying to overcome, and that's really one of your core objectives in the game. And how you go about doing that, this again ties into the many different endings, is, it's really just how are you building and exploring the relationships around you to overcome Nightshade. And that could be anything from trying to convince his top people to betray him, maybe try to convince them to take his place, maybe you're trying to take his place, maybe one of your other friends is the right person to take his place. There's a lot of different paths you can kind of go down to explore how are you trying to kind of overthrow this evil dictator. And then, of course, as you're getting into the story, you begin to realize that some of the terrible things that the dictator does are kind of driven by logical reasons. So there's really everything is very kind of gray. There's not a lot of true black and white villains as you kind of get deeper into the story.
Yeah, and so when we played Moonbriar during the distribution process, I remember having a conversation with João from IndieX, and we were talking about some games, and both of us felt this was anthropomorphic A Song of Ice and Fire. So you just proved this right, because that's exactly how we've. Like, I'm a huge fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I felt it kind of ambience, like even when during this prologue, you notice that kind of grayer shade to the story, because for me it's also what made me as a big a fan of Song of Ice and Fire as I am, because there's always you can always look into different perspectives, and I think you're doing it really well on Moonbriar. You're not falling into the trap of doing like a manichaeistic approach of this is good, this is evil, or this is the lesser evil. And that's why I'm really enjoying the story, John. Congratulations.
I'm glad no, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear that was kind of what the vibe that you got while playing it. That was absolutely the goal. And it makes for a tricky and very slow, unfortunately, process of trying to write these things in a way. But I am trying to, where possible, avoid some of the tropes. Tropes can be very handy in a story. They can really help quickly, let the viewer or the player get a sense of what needs to happen in the story and what, purpose a certain character might serve. But where possible, I am trying to explore things that keep things more open-ended. Even the people that are very objectively good in the story, for example, your mother is a key part of the first act of the game, but a lot of her perspectives, depending on your own kind of perspectives, can sometimes come across as maybe she's avoiding conflict too far. Like maybe sometimes you have to, have conflict to achieve the results you need. Maybe not, but that's kind of the things that we're trying to explore. Of like, even sometimes the feedback and the guidance you're going to get from objectively good characters is not always necessarily the best path. So I'm trying to find that balance on both sides of letting the player kind of see these things, and then them getting to make the decision of like, do I want to listen to my mom? Do I not want to listen to my mom? Do I want to listen to the stuff that Nightshade or someone else is saying, or do I not want to listen to it? And kind of letting them make the call at the end of the day about what's the right path to take.
Someone is asking if Oldblood is coming to the physical event. Unfortunately not. We already spoke about this before the streaming. Since you're located in the US, isn't it? And
I am, yeah. I'm in Texas. I did want to go. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it out there.
But you have to return, because you told me and you already said this during the streaming session. You've been to Portugal in 2004 or
I'm sorry. I don't mean to
2006.
pry. It's just
So you have
Mhm.
to return because things really changed
Nightshades
since that time.
I'm sure it has. It's been a very long time. I do need to come back. I absolutely loved Lisbon.
Oh, but I've said too much already.
So I was checking. You in 2015, Oldblood released Masochism.
Hmm.
There must be
It
someone
was another project
Yes.
you were involved in. I believe you are in the studio. I don't know if you own the studio. If you're in the studio since its inception. Um, how was that process? So it was also a narrative game, but more of a horror game.
It
Is this what you want to specialize? Like people when they recall Old Blood think about pure narrative games?
That's definitely the core of
I'm
what
afraid I just cannot.
I'm looking to do on it.
Since
We
your mother
spoke yet
went
before the session started, where when I first was getting into the indie scene, I was more on kind of trying to develop traditional games, strategy games,
If she
things of
wouldn't
that
provide the
nature. And
medicine, I'm sure it was
at some point, I got a little
for
bit burned
reason.
out on it and took a little bit of a
Well,
break
yes.
from game development. And
She's having
then,
fits.
yeah, in 2005 or
I
15,
really
kind of
shouldn't
came back
say.
and
She's
was
so
like,
ashamed.
I've always been a big reader. I've
Can I
been
give
very
him a
passionate
gift
about
too?
stories.
She must
I
have had
enjoy
one.
great films,
Yes.
and I
So
really
sweet.
wanted to get
Can
back
speak
into
next
game
spring when we
development,
like.
but with
I
a stronger
understand.
focus on narrative
Well,
as being like the
perhaps
core
I can
part
speak to
of
Mother.
what I want to do. I want to tell stories, and it just so happens that
Would you?
game development
Truly?
for me is the best way
I
that
would,
I can
but
kind of
please.
tell some of these stories.
You must swear you
So
won't.
Masochism kind of began with that. It was I called it a narrative horror game because it is. I would at face value, if you're just looking at it or you're watching the trailer for it, you would probably assume that it's just a straight horror game. But it is very narrative focused. I would say it's close to something like a Year Walk if you've ever played something like that, where it's kind of got some horror elements, but it's also lots of kind of walking around and talking to people and just experiencing the kind of the creepy story. But it was a much smaller project than this one. We developed that one. That one was predominantly me and one artist, so it was an even smaller team involved on that one. But we developed that game in about 9 months. It was incredibly fast. We knew that the game was. It touches on some very
Hello, Fern.
uh,
I hope you've come to return our
some
terror
intense
page.
topics, so I didn't know if anyone was even going to play it. It was a very
Is it
experimental
okay if I
game,
just
so we
leave
kind of
it?
developed it with the
Well,
assumption of like, no
I
one's
suppose
actually going to play this game,
there are
so
a
let's
few
just
that
work
just
really, really
don't
fast
take any
and try to develop a game. The core idea is I was very curious if, in video games, uh, people kill other people in games all the time. It's this like common recurring theme in games of like whether you're playing Call of Duty or Halo or whatever it is, like death is just such a huge common thing in games. The whole idea of masochism began with me kind of wondering if I could ever make someone actually feel guilty about that in a game. And so that's kind of where I set out to make that project. And then we got very lucky when we put the game out there. I really thought no one would ever play it, and then it didn't become a smash hit or anything like that by any stretch, but it got played way more than I thought it did. It was appreciated more than I thought it would be, and so that was very encouraging. Um, and yeah, so that kind of led me to wanting to explore more and more narrative games, and kind of gave me that realization of like, yeah, maybe there is a market for some of these narrative games out there.
Actually, I have to tell you, I didn't play it myself, but one of the members of at the time that wrote to my website, he bought it and he loved it. And I remember he kind of proselytizing masochism to us, precisely with that perspective. And even the art direction was kind of more gritty, more linear, obviously, with more of a comic book approach.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we were trying to go with we were trying to just move as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
develop it as quickly as possible. It definitely has, for anyone that's played it, there's some rough things in it. There's things we could have done better, but we were trying to move quickly because, again, at the end of the day, sometimes part of this is a business and you have to make some of these decisions where we were just like, we need to, as quickly as possible, finish this game. It could have used some more polishing than it got, but I'm still overall happy with the project and how it panned out. Ironically, though, Moonbriar is a very different experience. That game, one of the core themes of masochism is kind of exploring inevitability and you trying to fight back against this fate of you being a child that's on this path to becoming a serial killer. And it's this very, that naturally speaking, most people when they're playing that are going to be wanting to avoid that path. And the game was really trying to like fight against the player to keep forcing you down this path that you don't want to go down. Moonbriar is really the opposite of that, because whereas that one was kind of an exploration of inevitability and being like forced down paths that you don't want to go, Moonbriar is really just about you charting your own path and going down wherever you would like to go. So because of that, it's dramatically increased. It's actually ironically been dramatically more expensive and dramatically harder to build just this demo than it ever was to build Massachusetts, the entire game. So it's kind of one of those like funny, not funny, depending on your perspective, things in game development.
I have some kind of a hard question for you, especially because you're developing a narrative-heavy game. And some context to the question, I've felt for the last 12 years, by playing more than 1,000 or 1,200 games each year. Yeah, I know that's a lot. But this is my passion, indie games. So what I've noticed is some games, and I end up having the confirmation for some of the studios, that those games initially were either animated series, animated movies, or even books, or even comic books. But the teams or the studios noticed it might be easier because of the growth of the video game market to get investment to actually turn it into a video game. Do you feel this is something that happens more often than we think? And the hard part of the question is, did you imagine immediately Moonbriar as a video game? Or was it something else? And if it might be something else in parallel with a video game?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I guess to answer the first part of it, yeah, I absolutely do think that happens quite a bit, especially in the last several years before kind of the game dev market started cooling down a little bit, when there was tons of acquisitions and stuff like that happening. I'm sure there's lots of that happening where there's kind of this realization of, yeah, we can put the money in to be developing these things as video games.
I appreciate that. I really do.
As far as what I set out with this, I definitely began it as wanting to make a video game. I think I very briefly debated that maybe this would be better told as an actual novel rather than a video game. In a lot of ways, that gets a lot cheaper. It's much more kind of self-reliant on yourself to really create the project. You're not bound by budgets. It can be as grand or broad as you would like it to be. So that's kind of the challenge when you're trying to take a story and make it into a video game, is suddenly you are now bound by some of these things. I'm sure it's very similar for filmmakers and things like that, where you can have this really powerful story that in a book can be as grand and huge and over the top as you want it to be. But when you're trying to translate that into an interactive experience, you're going to have to, by the nature of it, figure out how to tighten that up. So, yeah, I mean, but we did it with Moonbriar, though. I wanted to start this out as a video game project and just kind of explore that. And unfortunately, as I've been developing it, the scope of the project just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Feature creep is a real thing. So it just keeps getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. But I'm happy with the direction that it's going, though.
But is it a possibility in your down the road that even a novel could be published around Moonbriar? Are you thinking about it?
I'm trying to not get too far ahead on that kind of stuff. I think in a world, yeah, like if this game comes out and we're able to, recoup our budget, even would be great. Narrative games, like I said, they're kind of niche. So my hope is that this will find a good audience, and that it'll be able to like recoup the investment back so that we can continue to explore narrative games like this. But yeah, if it's doing well, I would absolutely love to explore. I think the world that we're crafting here is an interesting one. I think the ability to explore other parts of the world, maybe other races of animals, or further explore stuff here, whether in this video game or in novels or other things, would be very exciting to do. So that's kind of my hope, is eventually to explore that. But right now I'm sort of just like I'm just focused on this game, though, and then we'll see what happens from there.
And technically, we know this is still a demo. We have a vast cast on Moonbriar. and they all have their approval of our actions and our reactions and our answers. Are you thinking of showing us this information, or this will be kind of hidden? Like it's measured by the game, but it's not visually accessible to us. We have more or less to take in consideration how a specific character reacted to our actions.
Yeah, right now in the demo it's not visible, but you do get the notices when their reputation has gone up and down. I am very torn on this. I think there's benefits of being able to show it to the player. So at some point we may come back in and work that in. We are planning on redoing a lot of the UI elements anyway, so that might be tied into that. But I think there's also pros and cons of just you having to sort of mentally juggle where, you know, based on all the conversations I've had and how I feel about this character, it feels in some ways a little bit more real when you don't necessarily know 100%.
It's less mechanical and it's more emotional, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I recall, for example, Telltale Games used to do that. Those kind of information were hidden, and you just need to have some kinds of. You have to be sensible to your own actions and answers to know where a specific character would lead. And I think maybe that's more immersive than showing a specific number. It almost breaks the connection, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah, and that's kind of the core idea. I mean, if we get a lot of tons of feedback in the demo and everyone's kind of like saying like we really need this to feel like we can make the right decision, I do want to help empower the players to make good decisions throughout the game. But yeah, right now that's kind of this exactly you described that perfectly. That's really kind of the direction where we decided deliberately, at least out of the gates, to not divulge that information.
So, and what's your roadmap for Moonbriar? When can we expect, or when are you more or less in the ballpark thinking of having the full
It's going to
release?
be, we're still a ways out. My hope is that it'll be towards the end of next year that we'll have the game done. That's what I'm aiming for, is kind of maybe the fourth quarter of 2024. But we'll see. That's where I'm aiming for. Maybe we'll be a little bit faster than that. Maybe we'll be a little bit slower than that. Things always generally take longer than you expect that they will, but that's my hope, is sometime later next year that this will be complete.
This is a good example we have now, and we're reaching the end of our streaming session, but a good example not only for the narrative part and narrative side, but how much our statistics influence the outcomes. So I have a pretty high diplomacy now, or at least I think I have 11 points.
You do, yes.
Compared with the rest. So I have, it's a sure thing to just say this to Orca.
I can't expect you to break your word.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that is. There's not a ton of those types of decisions in the first act of the game as you're kind of building it, but there are 3 or 4, I think, that happen in this one. But then those become more and more regular of a thing the deeper you're getting into the game, where you're able to leverage that to either, in this case, yeah, you were able to hold on to a secret. You didn't have to divulge it. You gained a new trait, which will, sometimes also positively or negatively impact how characters.
Oh, negatively too?
Yeah, okay. If they think, for example, that you're known to like not be secrets, other characters will take that into account for sure.
That's good, and that's also really challenging on your side to actually develop all the map and the branching of all of this.
It's a headache.
Yeah, John, it's when we had with that saying, all good things must come to an end, and I think it's exactly what's happening. I was really enjoying this conversation. Obviously, like I said, this is the kind of game that it's one of the most challenging to do a streaming session at the same time, because
it is.
Yeah, that's why I still suggest everyone that is watching, please go try the demo by yourselves, because the demo is live on Steam now, isn't it?
It is. No, honestly, you're exactly correct. It's a very difficult thing to demo, but you did an amazing job of kind of walking through it and asking some really amazing questions about the project. So it's been really exciting being able to get to sit down and talk to you guys about the game.
I'm also really happy to see Western approaches to visual novels, like bringing this really Japanese heavy, or at least traditionally Japanese heavy genre, reinterpreting it, using it as a tool to tell amazing stories. Just out of an example, I coordinate a program here in Portugal for PlayStation called PlayStation Talents, where yearly, PlayStation helps to publish a game from a studio that is starting. And this year, after 8 years, 8 editions of the program, it was the first year where a visual novel won
Hmm.
the award. It was a solo developer. It's her first game. She's just finished her degree, and I was really happy. So the market is opening, and
I that's exciting to hear, and I'm definitely hoping that that is the case. There's not a ton, to your point, of Western developers right now that are trying to explore this. I think it is still very niche, but I'm hoping that as more and more games are starting to come out, like I said, the Road Wardens and the Pentiments and the Life and Suffering of Sir Bronte, there's lots of games that where narrative is becoming a bigger part of it, and it's not necessarily tied into the traditional visual novel elements that you would expect. So yeah, no, I'm excited to be a part of that in a very small way with this project.
out of curiosity, do you feel, how are your expectations since visual novels broke the frontiers of Japan, especially, and I think mainly because of Ace Attorney, but also Danganronpa and other
Hmm.
big series. And now the Western consumers are also into visual novels. Do you also feel that the other way around will happen? For example, Japanese players that are really into visual novels that might be also looking for international developers, indie developers from the US, from Europe, and interested in playing this Western approach to visual novels.
It's my hope. It is my hope. It's hard to know until you actually develop it and put something out into the market to see how the market is going to react to it. And that does tie into where localization is going to be one of the big challenges for me to solve long term, is to figure out if it really does seem like there's a chance for that, that it absolutely, I would love to explore being able to localize this in other languages and getting it out there to maybe the broadest international audience that we can.
John, it was amazing having this almost 1 hour conversation with you. Congratulations on Moonbriar. It's a really amazing game. I'm really happy to have another amazing visual novel as part of IndieX. Personally, I would like to thank you for submitting the game and for enriching the IndieX catalog this year with Moonbriar.
Well, thank
Uh,
you.
and also for this conversation. The best of luck for you and the team and the development and release of the game. And I know this year you won't be able to visit us in person, but I hope that next year, with the approach of the release of Moonbriar, that you could
That would be
visit us in
amazing.
Lisbon, and we would be really happy to have you here.
That would be
Thank you,
amazing. And
John.
it gives me a goal to aim for. So thank you so much for hosting this. I
Thanks a lot,
appreciate you.
John. And please stay tuned, because in a few minutes we will return with another streaming session. I will be your host for the next hour, and we'll play another genre. And I think it's the first time we're going to have a game of this genre this year. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
A dark promise, carried from one generation to another. Our beloved home, threatened by war, famine, and plague. All the while, our enemies grow ever stronger, ever bolder. Now we fight to save what we love, or risk losing it all. The Great Culling has begun. Moonbriar, a narrative adventure.